When constructing a phylogenetic tree, it's important to understand the difference between divergent and convergent evolution, and then what it means to sort homology versus analogy, or homologous structures versus analogous structures. So to start, divergent evolution is where organisms had to diverge based on their environments. So they would share a common ancestor and then find themselves living in different environments, and from that, any of the organisms which had either genetic or physical characteristics which made it best fit for its environment, it's going to pass those genes on and then be very different from another organism in another environment which had to survive its environment in a different way. And then throughout time, they have diverged from one another, seemingly being very different possibly depending on where they're living. Convergent evolution is the idea that you have an organ or groups of organisms that did not descend from a common ancestor, but throughout time, these organisms had similar problems in similar environments. And because they had similar organisms and similar environmental pressures, they were kind of forced, or just throughout time, they became very similar to one another. So similar problems led them to have similar adaptations in their environment, but not starting out from a common ancestor. So now looking at the structures, or homology versus analogy. Again, we've already seen this in the last chapter, but please note again that homologous structures, and it's really important that you understand this, that these are thought to have a common ancestor. But again, given their environments, wherever they were, they diverged from one another. So that would be an example of divergent evolution. And then analogous structures would be an example of convergent evolution. Having the ability to fly does not necessarily mean that the organisms share any sort of a common ancestor, or even related in any way. So a bird versus a bat versus an insect, they fly. We can make analogies to compare them, but not closely related in not having a common ancestor. So for all of the phylogenetic trees, what we focus on is not analogous and convergent evolution, but we focus on homologous and divergent evolution. More examples of homologous versus analogous structures. It's color-coded, so the homologous structures, again, internally they share similar internal bone structure, the lizard versus the bird, human, and whale, but they use these structures in different ways in which they live. So for digging with the lizard, the bird for flying, the human with grasping, and the whale for swimming. Analogous structures are all coded blue because the penguin, the fish, the whale, the turtle, they all use their body structures for swimming, but internally they are very different from one another. But you, again, on the outside, look at them and you would think analogous structures share a common ancestor, but they're just too different on the inside for that to be the case.